Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Happening. My name is Jorge Shaft, and I have got quite the show planned for you today. There was a lot of stuff I really wanted to talk about. I've got the Imperial system, which is coming back to the UK. Not good. I've also got the Cabinet, which is a big new thing. Lots of everybody kind of being reshuffled, new people going into new posts, etc., all kinds of exciting stuff. I'm going to skip over across the pond and talk about AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and her latest stunt. And I've got much more coming than that. But let's go straight to our first story for today. The big, I guess in my circles, because I'm me and I have like weird interests and I obsess over certain things. The big thing for me this week was the Imperial system coming back. There's going to be a lot of sort of places to talk about where it is. I've got the Times on their Twitter feed, which was a little tweet that said, Boris Johnson is to announce the return of imperial weights and measures, making it legal for market stalls, shops, and supermarkets to sell their goods using only Britain's traditional weighing system post-Brexit. This is the sort of thing that makes me just really, really angry. And it's kind of one of those stranger things, if you're not like aware of like my kind of mental thinking, I guess. You think like, oh, well, you're more annoyed at like, weighing apples than you are about like, human lives, things like that. No, I actually really do care about the human lives. But here's the thing. Who does this serve? Like, what purpose does this legislation have? You could say, oh, it's like a symbolic thing, It's like, Britain reasserting itself as like an independent country. So, okay, why? Like, why? Why does Britain need to sort of have a unique weighing system? It's, are the French any less independent because they use the metric system than anyone else? Are the Russians? Is Afghanistan less independent than everywhere else because they too use the metric system? So why would Britain be like a unique thing with this step back to use this archaic old system? And it is archaic. Genuinely, I mean it from the bottom of my heart. The imperial system, the feet, inches, stones, ounces, all that stuff, is really incredibly inconsistent, illogical, and frankly useless. There's a quote which I always pull out when this argument comes through. I forgot who wrote it. The extract I have doesn't say. But here's the quote in its entirety. In metric, 1 milliliter of water occupies 1 cubic centimeter, weighs 1 gram, requires 1 calorie of energy to heat up by 1 degree centigrade, which is 1% of the difference between its freezing point and its boiling point. An amount of hydrogen weighing the same amount has exactly 1 mole of atoms in it. Whereas in the American system, the answer to how much energy does it take to boil a room temperature gallon of water is go yourself, because you can't directly relate any of those qualities. It's actually even worse when you look at various examples. I was reading actually just yesterday online. I know, the most valid source there ever was. But this person was pointing out that in the imperial system, because the measurements are all quite imprecise, like there were these 2 tennis players who, like in the imperial system, they count as the same height. They're 6'7". But like you look at the pictures of them, and one of them is obviously taller than the other. And it's like, yeah, because the difference between them is actually about 2.5 centimeters. But that's too small to to count with the imperial system because 1 inch is 3 centimeters. And can you recall off the top of your head what the measurement system is that's smaller than inches? And even if you do, the question then is, when would you ever use it? Now, you could say, oh, well, it's not important really knowing, like, the difference in height between, 2 tennis players. To which, again, I really stop you. Hold on. What is the point then of a measurement system? Like, if you don't want to answer the question of who is the tallest ever person to win a tennis Grand Slam, then why would you have a measurement system in the first place? If you don't want to answer the question, how heavy do you want your bag of groceries to be? Then why would you have it? Why would you go? And even if you did want to answer those questions, why would you go for a less convenient, a less useful, and an absolutely non-translatable system? Now, of course, this has been a huge controversial subject, and the imperial system, ever to my annoyance, does have its defenders. There's I'll be real, the older generation who grew up using only the imperial system. And I kind of see them, I know it's not going to be very kind, but I see it the same almost as like a child who grew up with, like a cult. It's like, well, yeah, of course you believe, insane nonsense because you were brainwashed as a child and now you've got like this unfortunate kind of programming in your head. And then apart from that, there really isn't much at all. There's a small brigade that says it's more convenient, but like to no evidence. It's like what is more convenient about, what is so hard to figure out about 150, liters or milliliters of like flour when you're cooking? Because that was like the big argument, was all like, oh, actually the imperial system's way better when you're like cooking, even though it's less precise. It's always approximates. It really irks me because like you're saying then that like, oh, the French, the Italians, the Chinese are somehow like having a harder time cooking than the British or the Americans because they're using like the metric system for measuring how much ingredients they're putting in. The imperial system, it really does kind of fit this incredible, amazing problem where it's like somehow it is, to my mind anyway, less precise, but also less intuitive. I mean, I had to pull up the Wikipedia page to find out what all the conversions are for certain things. And now that I've closed it, I can't tell you for the life of me how many inches it takes to go into a foot, how many feet go into a mile. And then even if I did tell you that, the imperial system somehow changes all of that as soon as you go on the water. In the metric system, a boat that travels 1 kilometer has traveled the same distance as a car that's traveled 1 kilometer. But in the imperial system, a car that's driven 1 mile has driven less distance than a boat which has driven 1 nautical mile. For no reason, as far as I can tell. Because water is apparently like a magic substance that changes all calculations and measurements that could ever be conceived of. It's like genuinely like, why? And now, thanks to the government, you're going to be able to walk into a shop and see only these insane, stupid measurements being put out, in a shop. Chances are it won't be in sort of like big supermarkets, and they probably won't be in tourist towns. The Sainsbury's that's like, the mental picture I have in my mind is the Sainsbury's in Canterbury, I used to live in Canterbury. Very tourist place. Lots of people from Europe going to visit. Like, to my mind, what I see is like the Sainsbury's there is just going to keep the metric system for everything because they know, yeah, we get lots of tourists here, and none of them are going to have any clue what we're talking about when we say, oh yeah, put your sausages in this many pounds. But then, like, small corner shops run by little old folks who now had over 20 years. It's been it's been over 20 years now since the European Union Weights and Measurements Act. It's had 20 years to learn the metric system, but somehow in that time refused to do so, or refused to accept it. And they're going to put it all up, and they're going to have, a customer base of older folks briefly liking it. But then anybody under the age of 40 is going to be like, but why? So it doesn't serve a purpose. It just makes things harder and more inconvenient and more isolating. Because you see, at the end of the day, this is what I really, really fundamentally object to this about. This isolates us, this measure. It makes us come across. You walk into a shop and you see, cloth being sold using some weird, strange, ancient measurement system that nobody knows about except us and the Americans. And that's what tourists are going to think. It's like, that's strange. That's weird. Why? Like, I went to Germany and everything was in metric. I went to Italy, everything was in metric. I went to Sudan and everything was in metric. And then I went to Britain and it was suddenly all in Imperial. And that ultimately gets in the way of then Britain, when this too shall pass, when this government finally gets its long overdue day of having lost an election and gets replaced by sane internationalists, it's just going to make that process of reintegrating ourselves into this, into a semi-sane, position on the world stage. It's just going to make that much, much harder. But what do you think? Leave your comments below. I always make a point of reading the comments and responding. Last week, in fact, there was quite the discussion with some of the comments, which I really love doing every time. But I hear that there's other people who exist. Yeah, I know, right? Really strange. I don't know how to feel about that. But here they are. I'll catch you all again very, very soon. Greetings and welcome back to The Happening. My name is Jorge Shaft, and so far I've talked about the Imperial system being brought back into shops, where it will do nothing but inconvenience me and any other person who was born after the year 1825. But let's go speed on right forward to what was arguably this week, in the UK anyway, the big kind of politics story in terms of like substance. And I always like substance because, it directly affects the world around me and everyone else. And it is who's in and who's out in the new cabinet reshuffle. All right, so I've got Sky News up for this. Just a moment. The sort of window I had for it has decided to shut down. But basically what's happening is, right, here we are. I've got it. So, Boris Johnson reshuffling cabinet. Who's going and who's staying? All right. This was written on Wednesday, and therefore it starts with the Prime Minister is reshuffling his cabinet today. The PM will today conduct a cabinet reshuffle to put in place a strong, united team to build back better from the pandemic, said a Downing Street source. Yesterday, the PM set out his plans for managing COVID during the autumn and winter. More on that later. But the government must also redouble our efforts to deliver on the people's priorities. The PM will be appointing ministers on that afternoon to focus on uniting and levelling up the whole country. So, the question then is, did they? Well, see what you think. Who was out? I've gotten another Sky News article for this, which is just more clear, more graphic about it. It's who's in and who's out as Prime Minister. Okay, out. Gavin Williamson, the Education Secretary. After 18 months as Education Secretary amid the COVID-19 pandemic, Gavin Williamson has been removed from the role. All right. Out was Robert Buckland as Justice Secretary. Robert Jenrick, who was the Housing Secretary, is also out, as is Amanda Milling, who was the Conservative co-chair. All right. You might be thinking, well, all right. Well, I know Gavin Williamson, not perhaps, because he was the Education Secretary, and there was all sorts of just massive scandals with education. But then these other people who maybe don't really know them, you kind of think like, well, who are they? Well, the reason why I highlight them is going to be revealed right now, because moved into different positions has been Dominic Raab is the big one. He has been demoted from Foreign Secretary to Justice Secretary and the Deputy Prime Minister. So now you see the Robert Buckland part. He's been replaced by Dominic Raab. This one might ring a few bells because, in fact, just last month, Dominic Raab was in the news on a really big way because he was on holiday, just, texting from a beach while Afghanistan was falling. And his response to all of it was like, yeah, don't worry though. I can totally do my job as Foreign Secretary from the beach. Yeah, I don't think I need to elaborate more on that one, do I? No. Also moved has been Liz Truss, who's been moved from International Trade Secretary to become Foreign Secretary. She's also given the role of Women and Equalities Minister, which just makes me wonder. Which one of those things that just makes me wonder, do these titles mean anything, or do they just pile them on? Just like, oh yeah, no, you can do 3 departments at once. Go, whatever. And then finally, Michael Gove has been moved to become the Housing, Communities and Local Government Secretary. Again, isn't that quite a lot of departments all at once. But hey, he's just been taking it. He also took on cross-government responsibility for levelling up and keeping his ministerial responsibilities for the union and elections. Okay, I think a picture might be starting to form in people's minds, and I'll just confirm, yeah, this government has actually upgraded, and I know, right? What Boris Johnson has done is he's taken absolute incompetent fools and moved them somewhere where they can do less damage. You know, Gavin Williamson was just scandal after scandal after scandal, messed up the exam results, and millions of school children ended up with like no idea. It's like, what were my A levels really? Like, did I even assume I even did my A levels, which isn't a guarantee because of the pandemic. And then the computer system that calculated it all was just elitist, and kind of went like, oh, well, this person's going to a good school, so I assume that they're going to have a better grade, and bump it up 2 grades. Oh, this person gets straight A's, but they also are going to a poor school in a decrepit inner city. Gonna mark them down now. So it's good he's gone. Dominic Raab, same thing. He was going off on holidays all the time. He was saying stupid stuff at every turn he could. And then, yeah, now he's being moved to a less important position. And also formally given Deputy Prime Minister, which he basically already was. When Boris Johnson was sick of COVID, it was actually Dominic Raab who was the one who's kind of like the designated successor, which I don't know. That makes me feel very strange, uncomfortable things. Mostly terror. Yeah, mostly terror. And then Michael Gove is moved to housing. Housing, big issue. Like, my flat is expensive and it's tiny. We need to build more housing. And have you noticed that Michael Gove has been the only person since 2010, the only person to have been a minister continuously? Like, I mean it. Like, if you look at the cabinet of David Cameron, first year, in coalition with the Liberal Democrats, Michael Gove was there as a minister. He was Education Secretary. And then he has stayed as a minister this entire time. And by all accounts, it's because, he's evil, but he's intelligent, he's good at the job. There's only one exception to all of this. This trend of, smart people who are kind of good at their jobs are staying around. Actually, there's a couple of exceptions. Nadine Dorries has been moved in to become the culture secretary, where she, if you just look at the European counterparts, especially, you see she is just woefully underqualified for it. There was a post I saw about it where it was the French education secretary wrote a book on Verdi. The German culture secretary was like a major sort of theatre performer and manager for many years. Nadine Dorries was on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. So not great. Ben Wallace is still the defense secretary, even though the military keeps going into just horrific, absolute scandals with him around. And then most disappointingly, in my opinion, is Priti Patel stays as the Home Secretary, even though she just bullies everyone that she encounters. Now, the common thought, and a lot of people will say this kind of story, is like, oh, it doesn't matter, like, who's sitting on what chair, doing what. They're all just like self-important, giving themselves titles. But ultimately, yeah, but it actually really does matter who is there. Just look at the big person who's been kicked out. Gavin Williamson, as Education Secretary, was useless, and that matters. Incompetent leadership of that department led to millions of school children having dubious exam results. It resulted in months, weeks of delays and confusion and all kinds of emergency. Oh, wait. Actually, no, we're going to do this instead. Actually, what? Actually, because he was too stupid to make it work. It's the same thing with Dominic Raab. As Foreign Secretary, he was constantly going abroad and just saying the wrong things to people and just being at the wrong place, but then insisting that, no, actually, it's fine that I'm on holiday, as the world burns, because, my holiday time's so important. And that has real world consequences, not only when you read in the newspapers, but also because it affects those things. You might not have children yourself, but whose Education Secretary might help dictate who is going to be your next employee. So it is a damn shame that some of the nasty and the vicious are staying. Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's the lord of the 18th century, still stays in charge of the parliamentary procedures, even though the parliamentary procedures are obviously out of date and need to be updated to match, hell, not even the 20th century, the 21st century. Priti Patel staying as Home Secretary despite seeming to be incredibly giddy and eager to kick out any immigrant that she can spot. The fact that Dominic Raab, despite his idiocy, still has the Justice Secretary, major position of power over, the fates of anyone who gets unfortunately entangled in the justice system. And the fact that Michael Gove, even though he's competent and clever, is also somebody who believes in absolute absurdities on every turn, is now going to be the one in charge of building more homes in the UK. All of it's terrible. All of it's not great. Hopefully we get a new government as soon as possible. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments of this video. I'm broadcasting on, I know, at least on Facebook. I'm on the app, YouTube. So catch us there on Relaks Radio. But first, I'm going to let some other people have a chat. And then I'll talk to you afterwards very soon. See you.
The valuations that you place on an asset are always behind you. It's always in hindsight. It's never in front of you. And that's one of the challenges, right? Because you're always valuing what happened yesterday. And what you need is what's going to happen tomorrow. What am I saving or investing for? Why am I doing it? When will I need the money? And how much money do I need? Yeah. So that's quite important, because when you're looking at your net worth, you got to start and say, well, what do I want my net worth to be, so that there's a goal, and then work backwards. How do I get there? And if I can start with £50 or $50 a week, if I save that every week, and you can go online and use calculators online. I don't have to teach you the maths behind it, but you can say, okay, and if I get a 3% return and I put this away for how long will it take to reach my goal? And that's called just this basic cash flow projection calculations. And it's what we use in financial planning all the time. What we say to clients is we say, okay, what is your goal? What is your objective? Where do you want to go to? And we discuss that in a lot of detail and over most of the meeting. And then the rest of it is saying, okay, in your exact circumstances, with your risk profile, with how you feel about investments and pensions and taxes and where you are and who you work with, and your education level or your lack of education or how involved you want to be. There's a lot of variables that we take into account, and then we say, okay, here's a plan. You start like this, that's great. And then we review it all the time. And we say, okay, we need to increase it, we're on track, we're not, this is what is happening. Because remember, when you're dealing with assets, the valuations that you place on an asset are always behind you. It's always in hindsight. It's never in front of you. And that's one of the challenges, right? Because you're always valuing what happened yesterday. And what you need is what's going to happen tomorrow. So that's a struggle. Yeah. So there are strategies everywhere from £50 a week up to £100 million, and they're different, right? They range differently from everyone, but and from country to country, to be fair. Different countries have different tax laws, so different vehicles. But from your point of view, at the sort of normal end, I'm not going to call it the low end because I'm in that boat as well. It's as tax efficient as you can get it. That's where you start. You use all the tax efficiencies, and then you step up into different things.
Hello and welcome back to The Happening. My name is Jorge Shaft, and so far I've talked about quite a bit, haven't I? I've talked about the Imperial system and gone on a massive big old rant on that. I really dislike the Imperial system. Metric is just better in literally every single capacity. I also talked about the new cabinet and how Boris Johnson, shifting chairs on the Titanic, you might say, but really it matters hugely who is, in charge of big important government departments that have a direct impact, on your life. But now is my last segment, unfortunately. This week actually had a huge amount of stuff I really wanted to talk about, but alas, alack, constraints mean that I'm not going to be able to sort of do it. So I won't talk about Norway with its electing the socialists. I'm not going to talk about the medical shortages that are happening in both the USA and in Vietnam. Even though COVID deaths in the UK have hit 50 per day, have hit 50 per day these past weeks in the UK. Nope. Instead, what I'm going to talk about is a bit contrary to my usual thing. Is I'm going to talk about the symbol thing, because it's a really big controversial subject and really kind of exploded all over the airwaves as it happened. And that was Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of the United States attended the New York Gala, which is this big party where to go you have to pay tens of thousands of dollars. All the sort of big, rich, elite people are there. She attended that, but then to this event wore a dress that said on the back, "Tax the rich." Yeah, I think you can already see the firestorm that's going to come from that. And it's one of those really kind of interesting questions that really does actually make me think. And yeah, I'm actually just going to put all my cards down on the table. I actually don't really know what to think about it. I have mixed opinions. I have mixed thoughts. I saw one commentator describe this as a bit of a Rorschach test on what you think of AOC. AOC, for those who don't know, is a congresswoman who was elected in a district in New York in the 2018 kind of midterms, who is very lefty, very kind of progressive, and she overthrew to get to her post a guy called Joe Crowley, who was like a really big deal in the Democratic Party. So very, very kind of explosive on the scenes, and been seen as like a leader of the kind of progressive movement there, fighting for things like a higher minimum wage, for environmental protections, for more infrastructure, for more rights for minority groups. She is, as that description would say, controversial, and a lot of people really do obsess about her. I don't. I just kind of think, she is who she is, and I'll clap when she gets stuff done, which hasn't been that much recently, though. Though recently, with the infrastructure stuff, the progressives have been fighting, which is good. But then she's gone and attended this with this kind of loud message. Here's the arguments that get put forward as to like good or bad. Because, ultimately, I think that's what I'm going to just do. Just explain what the arguments are and point out why I don't really buy them. Let's start with the argument against. A lot of people didn't like the fact that she kind of showed up to this event because it is this really elite, because the New York Gala really is this just incredibly elite, incredibly kind of filled with powerful people party, really, where all the like movie directors, the big like theater production CEOs, all the kind of movie stars, all come together, and they bring the politicians in. They bring in like big business people, and just have a party. Just like yeah, here we are drinking like champagne that was aged for 1,000,000 years in some barrel in the south of France, and it costs like your entire annual salary to buy one glass of it. Oh, isn't this great? And yeah, isn't this such a great party? It's one of those kind of events. AOC attending it, like, is kind of a symbol that she's giving up her kind of principles, her stands on like, oh, I'm for the people. I'm really here to like fight for economic justice. When like, how can you fight for economic justice when you then show up to, all these events with these millionaires and billionaires, and kind of ching ching and drink and joke and eat with them? Like, surely you could argue that that you want to fight them. Like, they're the ones who stand in the way of doing something about the climate crisis, about doing something about wages, about doing something about rights. Why would you sort of like hang out with these people? And then also to do so while wearing this dress, the argument runs that like it's just hollow symbolism. It's just something to like make people start talking about it, but like not actually achieve anything. Which, I mean, it's fair enough, but it's worked, hasn't it? I'm talking about it, and I barely ever talk about like stunts and symbols and things like that. I chose to talk about the cabinet, for God's sake, this week. The world's most boring subject, but like its substance. which to me says it worked on that front. It wasn't just me either. It was wall-to-wall coverage all over the media, especially the American media, but not just the American media. British media, French media, were all talking about this stunt. So there was clearly something to it that to kind of spread the message. And then the message itself, tax the rich. Like, where else is that, if you will, going to be like more controversial? This is, if you will, the argument runs in favor. It's like, oh, this was like the lion's den. This is where the rich hang out. This is like where they are. Now you're walking in and you're bringing in the message saying, hey, you in particular need to pay more taxes because you make millions and millions and millions of dollars a year, but don't pay any. I see that. Like, I can see why that kind of argument is good and it works, but I hesitate to actually like support it because, like, what's it backed by, basically? Like, okay, she walks into this event, is a congresswoman, so has power, and is in like a block. Now there's like a dozen of these progressives there who all kind of like believe roughly the same things. So okay, yeah, that's a lot of power, but like, what does it do? Going, oh, tax the rich in this gala with all these kind of movie stars there doesn't actually tax the rich. Instead, she should be like writing laws that says, oh yeah, we're going to tax the rich by this much more and make them pay or else. And then with that money, we'll pay for like all the good things we want our country to be doing. Isn't that a more productive use of time? Maybe, but maybe it isn't. Maybe just getting the message out is the goal. But then maybe it just saves face, Well, I would have a very hard time resisting the temptation if I got elected, to a big political office, and suddenly I was invited to like this big party of all the elites, the rich and famous. Like, I'll be real, like I'd have a very hard time kind of resisting that. And I find there's a lot of kind of like self-moralizing kind of commentators going like, oh, I would never accept it. And it's like, you only say that because you've never been offered it. But like, once you are offered it, would you say no to seeing your favorite movie star? Would you say no to being able to quiz your favorite movie director? I'm not so sure I could resist that, even if it didn't impinge, if you will, on like my principles. Even if it wasn't even if I still believed and still wanted to like tax them more and wanted to make them pay their fair share and contribute to society instead of being parasites. Still looks like a fun time. So I'm undecided. What do you think I should think? Let me know in the comments below. I always read the comments, and I really am interested to seeing what you all think, because I don't really know what to make of it myself. So I'm really looking forward to reading what you've got to say. I'd say I'll see you all again soon, but actually I won't, because there's this thing called like a schedule. The show's ending early, and so I'm going to be off. Anyway, see you next week. Bye.